right, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to welcome Dan Cooperstein, Senior Vice President of Compliance here at Corporate Synergies, and Ben Conley, partner at Seyfarth Shaw Law Firm. Today, they're going to break down the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and explore its impact on employee benefits. They'll share key insights on navigating insurance and tax provisions, compliance hurdles, and strategic opportunities for employers and plan sponsors. If you have a question, feel free to submit it in the chat, but we'll also be taking a lot of questions at the end. And then if we don't get to it, feel free to follow up with us on email. Today's recording and slideshow will be sent via email within the next day or two. And then for those who are eligible for SHRM and HRCI credits, those will also be included in that email. With that, Dan, feel free to take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Brianna, and welcome everybody. So today we're going to be talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, a massive, almost 1,000-page law signed on 4th of July this year. And while most of the provisions won't go into effect until 2026, it's really already changing the benefits and insurance landscape in a big way. And so this presentation today is really designed to give employers and plan sponsors of all shapes and sizes really thorough understanding of how the OBBBA will impact their health and welfare plans and insurance arrangements. And really, we're going to focus today really on the major, most game-changing changes in the Act and their economic implications. I'm joined today by one of my good friends and fellow ERISA attorneys, Ben Conley, partner at the law firm Seyfarth Shaw. Just really happy you could join us today, and it's just really nice you could join us. So let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and get started, and we can jump right in, kind of talking about what's on the agenda today and what we'll be talking about. So really, we're going to kind of start with just kind of big picture. How does this really reshape health and welfare plan rules? How can it really change your plan design? What are some of the big changes to health and welfare plans? Then we're going to talk about the economic impact, right? How we see this thing kind of impacting insurance markets and costs, and some of the other rule changes related to that. And then finally, we're going to kind of round it off by talking about how this impacted the tax reform law called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TICJA, that came out during the first term of the Trump administration, and really talk about some of those other tax and benefit rule changes as part of that. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to everyone's questions. And if not, if we don't get to your question, definitely shoot us an email to our events email, which you'll see at the end. And we will address every question. So also getting started here, I just wanted to briefly say, starting out right here, we're going to have some different pictures you're going to see on these slides of different big, beautiful bills, not just the legislation itself, but some other big bills, whether they be famous people or animals or other things. And our for extra credit today, if any of you can guess every single, what the name is of every single picture of every big bill that you see on every slide, starting here with slide 5, starting after slide 5. If you can send that to the events webpage, and we will surprise you with a special surprise. I personally will reach out to you with a special surprise for your organization, and we'll go from there. So hopefully I'll make it a little bit more fun, and, especially for a webinar about tax law. It can get a little dry. This will hopefully keep everyone awake for the duration of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and just kind of talk big picture, right? The OBBBA was a big thing. And maybe one of the most important things, right, was what was not included in it, right? What didn't make it? Because this thing evolved, right, over time. There was a House passed version that was passed, and then it went back to the Senate. There were additional changes. A lot of things just didn't make it into the final version of the bill that were heavily debated and contested. One of those things was the tax treatment of employer-sponsored health insurance. There's a tax exclusion for employer-sponsored health insurance that always comes up on the table as a big one that you know, Congress is always looking at as a potential revenue raiser. It was debated in this. It was debated in the TICJA when that was coming up. And fortunately for all of us in the industry, right, the tax exclusion remained, and there was no change to the tax treatment of ESI. Um, there were also some contemplated very large HSA contribution limit adjustments. Those things didn't make it in. And there were also the a change to the current rules around ICRAs, which are individual coverage HRAs that allow essentially like a defined contribution plan that allows employers to contribute uh, to health insurance for individual employees to get insurance on the ACA exchanges. Those changes would have created a new name for ICRAs called the Custom Health Option and Individual Care Expense Arrangements or Choice arrangements. But that never happened. So we still have ICRAs and we still have the old rules in place for ICRAs. And then the other big thing would have been changes to the cost sharing reduction subsidies. Those did not make it in. So cost sharing reduction subsidies or CSRs are subsidies or payments that the federal government makes to insurers to help lower the out-of-pocket cost for low-income individuals enrolled in silver tier exchanges. While they were part of the original statute of the Affordable Care Act as it was enacted, um, the federal funding for CSRs was halted by President Trump during his first term back in 2017. The House version of the bill would have brought them back into play beginning in 2026, but that just didn't make it in. So a lot of big things were contemplated, but they just didn't make it in. And so, you know, for one reason or another, they didn't make it into that final version. A lot of it had to do with just how much revenue it was going to raise or how much it was going to cost. But that left us with what did change, and that's going to be the focus of our presentation today. So one of the big areas that did still change were these three big rules that impact health savings accounts or HSAs and high deductible health plans, changes to the way that they interact with telemedicine, direct primary care, and the treatment of certain exchange plans with regard to HSAs. So, with that being said, Ben, why don't you kind of kick us off today and kind of and tell us a little bit about the changes for telemedicine.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Dan. And thanks again to the folks from Corporate Synergies for having me on to talk about what seemingly is the, biannual or even annual big changes to health and welfare benefits law. But notably, I mean, again, we had the Affordable Care Act, we had the Consolidated Appropriations Act. A lot of these were big structural changes to the very nature of health and welfare benefits. What I think Dan and I, Dan alluded to already, but what I think we realized was that what ended up happening in the final version here, the one that passed, was that this was more of changes on the margins, predominantly impacting the taxation of health and welfare benefits, which is important, needless to say, but a little less of a significant structural overhaul than what we've become accustomed to when Congress takes up these types of bills over the years. Okay, so first one we want to talk about is the telehealth relief. Now, contextually, you'll recall that COVID happened. It was a disruptive period, as I'm sure we'll all remember. And the government was essentially pulling all levers possible to try and control the pandemic. In our little corner of the universe, health and welfare plans, one of the avenues they saw to potentially control the spread of COVID was to find ways to keep people out of the doctor's offices. And one of the things the agencies had identified as a barrier to that was the restrictions around telemedicine, right? There were both state restrictions on what doctors could and could not do via telehealth, but also tax restrictions and group health plan related restrictions on how employers could offer them. So historically, because telehealth is viewed as a group health plan benefit, employers could not offer telehealth on a standalone basis unless it complied with the panoply of ACA requirements, including, among others, provision of full preventive care services. And while the iPhone attachments continue to proliferate, there is yet to be one that self-service colonoscopy. So until that comes true, it's really hard to comply with the ACA mandates via telehealth. So that was one big restriction or barrier. The other big restriction or barrier was, I seem to keep raising my hand here. Sorry about I'm going to try to talk less with my hands because it's making it look like I raised my hand. But the other big barrier was for employees enrolled in high deductible health plans who have HSAs, because as we know, under a HSA, unless it's preventive care, there's a mandated requirement that you be fully responsible for charges associated with your health care prior to meeting your deductible. And so while telehealth is an attractive avenue for people to receive healthcare services, for people in an HSA, they would still be required to pay the full market value. So essentially, during COVID, the government removed both of those restrictions. They said you can offer telehealth to people who aren't enrolled in the high deductible health plans, and you don't have to charge a copay. Both of those did expire or were set to expire. Now, while we would prefer that the telehealth group health plan ACA mandate exemption be lifted permanently, that has not been lifted. And so we are now back to an environment where, unless it qualifies for another exception, telehealth should generally be limited in scope to people who have enrolled in your group health plan coverage. But what the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did do was that it made permanent the telehealth relief with respect to high deductible health enrollees who are enrolled in high deductible health plan who have an HSA. What that means is, while not mandated, health plans have the option to offer telehealth at no cost to high deductible health plan enrollees, and it will not impact HSA eligibility. The nice thing they did here, which they failed to do last time, was this relief had previously expired as of 12/31/2024. They made the change retroactive to 1/1/2025, so there would be continuous coverage with no gap, which means those of you who predicted that Congress was going to re-up this and simply never started imposing copays along the way, guessed right. So fortunately for you, your plan sort of came into compliance. Again, I want to reiterate that this is an option, not a mandate. You can still charge for telehealth services if desired, but a lot of people find it to be a more cost-effective means of healthcare delivery, so want every incentive possible to push people into telehealth. Now, what Dan and I had been discussing before the call was, I think there's some discussion in the benefits community regarding the scope and breadth of this exception and whether it only extends to no-cost appointment fees or service fees, consult fees, or if it also extends to other things prescribed or ordered during the visit, such as lab tests and/or prescription drug costs. We think that's probably a pretty aggressive interpretation to extend it beyond the consult fee. It remains to be seen whether the IRS will clarify that point, but for the time being, it looks like this safe harbor, as it were, extends to the consult fee alone. If we want to go to the next slide, we can talk about the next. Oh, Dan, go ahead. So the next big change relates to a type of service that, and first I just got to say that while this is a bill, I would say this one is maybe neither big nor beautiful, although lovely shade of pink. So the nenext one is a service that I think Congress, it's so sort of unknown that Congress felt the need to define it. And that is the creation of an HSA safe harbor for so-called direct primary care service arrangements. And what I think I most equate this to would be sort of the concierge of medicine type service that has kind of arisen in the last couple of years. I know that, like One Medical, which then got purchased by Amazon, has probably been rebranded in the interim, is this type of service. And generally speaking, you would see these types of services as being a subscription-based service where you sign up to get access to this provider practice, let's say, and then oftentimes you're guaranteed, immediate access, no wait time, and the like. And oftentimes the consult fee is also covered in your subscription cost. What the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did was that it allowed these types of benefits to be offered without impacting, at no cost to the employee or below fair market value, with no impact on the employee's HSA eligibility. So if you have one of these subscription-based provider practice services and the employer is paying the subscription for that, or the premium for that, if that's what you want to call it, that will not impact HSA eligibility. Again, optional. It's not mandated that to the extent you have a DPC arrangement that you provide that at no cost. But if you want to do so, you can. Effective as of 1/1/26. So again, the telehealth one was retro to 1/1/2025. This one is prospective. And notably, also, if you have out-of-pocket expenses as an employee for these types of services, you can pay for those out of your HSA, your accumulated HSA funds. Devil's in the details. As I said, Congress did define what is a DPC, and notably, it's really just a narrow service for doctor's office settings, but would not cover, costs relating to general anesthetics, prescription drugs other than vaccines, lab services not run in the primary care setting. So, like, if you have like the throat culture, right, the throat swab where they go and do it and tell you in 10 minutes if you've got strep throat, that's should be fine. But if you've got something that's being sent off to the lab, that's probably not going to be covered. And notably, Congress put some parameters around how much this could cost on a first dollar basis without blowing the safe harbor, and that's $150 a month per individual or $300 per family. Okay, if we want to go to the next slide.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll take this one. One of the other big changes here was that the bronze or catastrophic exchange coverage that individuals can enroll in on the ACA exchanges or marketplaces, they will be treated like high deductible health plans. So it just kind of, I guess, zoom back a little bit, right? One of the general rules with regard to contributions to health savings accounts or HSAs is you can't contribute into an HSA if you're not enrolled in a high deductible health plan, and which has to meet certain limits and with minimum annual deductible and max contribution limits, things like that. Um, it was difficult for individuals enrolled in exchanges to set up HSAs. This really kind of opens that door for individuals that are enrolled in these bronze or catastrophic plans. Now, if they're in this individual coverage, they can treat that coverage as HSA compatible coverage and set up an HSA. So uh, that's a big development that happened for individuals. Doesn't really impact employers that much, but it does make exchange coverage a little bit more attractive to some individuals. And that is one of the kind of big changes that happened here. And then that's pretty much it for those are the big three really for HSAs. But one of the other really big changes that impacted health and welfare plans is the change to the DCAP limit. So the the OBBBA increased the maximum amount, the maximum contribution amount from $5,000 to $7,500. That will be effective for tax years beginning in 2026. And also, it will go up for married filings separately from 2,500 to 3,750. But one of the interesting things here is that it will not be indexed for inflation. So I don't know how much of the history you all know about this, but the this maximum annual exclusion amount for DCAPs has been in place since 1986, so hasn't changed since Ben and I were probably small kids, since it first went into effect. So it feels like it's been at 5,000 pretty much forever, with one exception, which was that in during the pandemic in 2021, as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. It was raised, the maximum limit for DCAPs was raised to $10,500. And which seemed like the right amount. I don't know, I don't know about you, Ben, but for summer camp, pre-K, I mean, those things, you have small kids, I have small kids, right? It's probably, it doesn't really seem to be that much. But in any event,
It's
7,500 is
certainly not when you factor in the bribe I have to pay to the counselors to keep from kicking my kids out of camp.
exactly, exactly, right? It's just not enough, right? So it's like I think a lot of people were hoping it would go to that 10,500 amount that we got to experience back in 2021, or at least that it would be indexed for inflation, so it would start to kind of come back into where it should be after 40 years of being at the same number at $5,000. But in any event, it is, that's what it is. It's 7,500 right now, and it will not be indexed for inflation. There was also an enhancement to the dependent care tax credit, which is something that individuals would do on their individual tax return. Um, basically increased the amount of the tax credit to 50% from 35%. So more generous there and a more generous phase down schedule. So more individuals can take advantage of more credit on the individual side of things. But that doesn't really impact the employers as much as the decap limit. And that was really the big news there. Um, so Trump accounts, Ben, why don't you take Trump accounts? Take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So Trump accounts are another sort of newly created animal of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And let me give you a high level summary of what they are, and then we can get into some of the specifics. Essentially, these are like retirement savings accounts, but for your children. So the idea behind a Trump account is twofold. Number one is that certain individuals who are born essentially during the remainder of the Trump administration will have established on their behalf and contributed money from the federal government to be invested and to grow on a tax preferred basis over time, subject then to withdrawal restrictions, somewhat akin to what you would see in an IRA. And then number two is individuals with qualifying children could also establish for their own children and contribute to these Trump accounts. So that's kind of the gist or high level is what these are, is that they would look like savings accounts. This is like you hear terminologies thrown around in DC and like the baby bonds or, that's kind of the concept behind what a Trump account would be. As noted, there are some limits on who can establish these accounts and how much money can go in. At the individual contribution level, your children would be subject to a $5,000 annual contribution limit, indexed for inflation. And then I noted that there is a government contribution potentially for children born during what would essentially be the remainder of the Trump administration. That doesn't count towards your limit, but sort of as a starter fund or seed money, if you will. If we can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So interestingly, we talk about this during this presentation because there is sort of an employee benefits element to Trump accounts, and that is that employers can, if desired, on their employees' behalf, make contributions to the Trump accounts of the children of your employees. These would count towards the annual contribution limits. And if you chose to establish one of these accounts, it would be, this is sort of a hybrid Dan and I were talking about between what we think would be like an IRA or retirement savings vehicle and a dependent care FSA or a sort of a child care vehicle, and that you have to have a written plan document, and you are required to follow the DCAP non-discrimination rules that would otherwise apply under Code Section 129. Presumably, everything would be blended in together, right? So you'd be cross-testing these Trump accounts also against your DCFSA contributions and otherwise applicable dependent care benefits. The employer contribution is actually capped at a more narrow level than the overall employee account at $2,500, and these would not count towards the individual's income. So there is somewhat of a tax benefit associated with it. And then these amounts are intended to be invested kind of like an IRA in low-cost index funds, diversified, obviously, with low expenses and no tax on earnings so that they can theoretically grow over time. And then they can come out generally when an IRA would, except that after age 18, they could also be taken out for things like higher education expenses. So sort of an alternative potentially to Section 529 accounts. Although it remains to be seen whether they would be as tax preferred as a Section 529 account, because in the 529 universe you've got potential state deductions for contributions, et cetera, which states would have to take action to make Trump account contributions tax deductible. We don't know a lot about these yet. We don't know, various things, right? Like what kind of vendors are going to implement these. We've talked to dependent care FSA vendors about, maybe this is a space they're going to get into. IRA providers about, is this a space they're going to get into? So far, we haven't seen a huge uptake. These haven't gone online yet. And then another, I think, open question is, does this fall under the, pre-established ERISA definition for types of benefits that would be subject to ERISA? So, lots of unanswered questions there. No guidance on, frankly, any of these provisions yet, least of which this one. So Dan, I don't know if you want to kick off on this one here.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for that. So I think that pretty much, yeah, I mean, so I think there's probably more questions than answers still. I mean, we know a lot about the Trump accounts, but maybe that's part of the reason why they haven't really kind of been, they haven't really gone online or haven't really been taken up by a lot of our clients yet. It's probably because I think we're all kind of waiting on some rules or guidance to kind of clarify, how it's all going to kind of come together, how those, right, non-discrimination testing rules will work in more detail. Just more of the specifics are still coming, hopefully soon. Um, this is really just kind of like some of the key takeaways here, right? So what are some of the big takeaways from what we talked about thus far when it comes to health and welfare plans, right? I think it's important that you review your plan document and SPD and other policies just to make sure that they're properly reflecting these new plan limits and eligibility rules from these changes from the OBBA. And of course, you want to communicate any changes to employees, especially when it comes to, right, what's going to constitute telemedicine or telehealth. How do you define remote care, what's in, what's not in, and you know, uh, same thing, right, with any changes you would make to the DCAPs, HSAs, um, and with regard to other arrangements. And of course, you're going to want to also make sure that you coordinate whatever changes you do make in light of these rule changes with your carrier and TPA partners, other plan vendors, just to make sure that you're properly implementing this and in compliance with the rules and also that you've taken some time to really evaluate how the non-discrimination testing is going to work for the increased DCAP limits. I kind of talked about that. We talked a little bit about the fact that it's been 5,000 forever, and even when it's been 5,000, I should say that a lot of clients we have and still have difficulty passing non-discrimination testing for their DCAPs, just given that it's the way that the non-discrimination testing rules work and the fact that it's based on utilization. So if highly compensated employees are utilizing it more than others, right, it can fail. I think it's this increase in the max contribution the max amount of the DCAP is likely to probably exacerbate any issues that you may have had in the past with just with the 5,000 amount. I think it'll probably be more likely that highly comp individuals uh, could potentially cause it to fail. So it's just something to watch. And of course, the non-discrimination testing issues with when it comes to Trump accounts, right, are something that we're kind of waiting more rules on, but they would also follow probably similar standards and rules, but we really don't know the details yet. So I would just say kind of stay tuned for that piece of it as well. Anything you wanted to add on that? Ben, I think we kind of talked
No, I
about
think that's right. I mean, I think the
that.
big question that we're seeing employers struggle with on the Trump account front is, look, we've got limited resources to devote to employee benefits. We haven't maximized the otherwise applicable tax preferred avenues, including, 401k matching contribution, health insurance subsidy, right? Flex credit for dependent care FSA, et cetera. And so because the Trump account is sort of, you know, a less urgent need for employees, among other things, right? You're saving
Yeah,
for your kids' retirement when many people are struggling to save for their own retirement.
yeah.
And it's less tax preferred. I've not seen a huge, I don't know about you, Dan, but I've not seen a huge uptake or interest amongst employers yet.
No, same with me as well. Yeah. So, all right, great. Well, so let's move on to this next section. And really what we want to do here is kind of really talk about what are the big rule changes that are applicable to ACA exchanges and the Medicaid rules that really will kind of impact costs and the health insurance markets generally, as well as taking a look at how these changes may impact your organization's potential ACA penalty exposure for under the ACA employer shared responsibility provisions or employer mandate, as it's commonly referred to, provisions, for 2026 and kind of going forward. So I think one of the big, you know, there were some big changes here, and one of the big things really was with these ACH rule changes on the exchanges. So Ben, why don't you gonna get us started with
Sure.
the with that? Great.
So, I mean, the story of the next two slides, I think, is the continued back and forth battle on enhancement and then restrictions of the eligibility parameters and tax credits available in the marketplace. What we've consistently seen since the passage of ACA, when we've had the flip-flopping of administrations, is under Democrat administration, there's enhancement of tax credits and relaxation of eligibility requirements for those credits, and then vice versa under Republican administration. And this is the latest iteration of that. First set here relates to eligibility for tax credits on the marketplace. Previously, there was some modicum of an assumed eligibility based on a variety of factors with a retroactive adjustment. The issue with that being that oftentimes when it's determined on the back end that the person wasn't actually eligible for the premium tax credit, there's not really a method for the government to recoup those overpayments to the insurance carriers. And so what the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did was move much of that verification to the front end before the individual starts receiving premium tax credits, enhancing those guidelines. So when you look at the second set, if we can go to the next slide of what changed here, this primarily relates to once you've been determined to be eligible for a tax credit on the ACA marketplace, what's the breadth and scope of those tax credits and how does that impact your plan coverage? So same story here, both with respect to who's eligible for the premium tax credits. Those guidelines had previously been broadened during COVID as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. And then subsequently in the OBBBA, those expansions had expired and were not further extended, with the idea being the fewer people that are eligible for the premium tax credits, the fewer people that are likely to enroll in the marketplace because it can be pretty expensive coverage absent those government subsidies. Same thing with cost sharing reduction subsidies. This is not the premium, the guaranteed fixed monthly rate that you're paying when you're enrolled, but rather the out-of-pocket costs associated with receiving services. There was an earlier discussion about expanding the scope of these so-called CSRs, but the OBBBA did not reinstate this funding and/or extend the funding. So what the combination of both of these things ultimately means is that coverage under the marketplace is going to be more expensive for more people.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think that right there, I mean, this one slide right here is a big reason for why we're gonna see some very big premium increases. And we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later about some of the CBO estimates, but there and some of the economic implications. But this one slide right here is a big reason for why there's going to be such a big double-digit increase in the cost of premiums on the ACA exchanges and the individual market in 2026. But the other big thing that's going to be increasing costs are changes to the Medicaid rules that were in the OBBBA. So the OBBBA made a number of different changes to both the enrollment eligibility rules as well as how Medicaid is funded and financed, as well as impacts to state state healthcare laws that provide for funding for Medicaid. But I think really one of the biggest things you probably heard about already, probably if you watch the news or listen to the radio, or, news, right, is this big work requirement, right? So one of the big changes was that the OBBBA imposes an 80 hours a month work requirement on adults, with some exceptions. There are some exemptions for pregnant women, for children, for those who are over the age 65. So there's just some exceptions to it, but that's a big one, right? That was something that a lot of folks were not expecting to get passed in the final version because it's a major change. And then there's certain prohibitions on states and their provider taxes. And I know we've been getting questions from clients that are affected by the New York MCO provider tax, which is a tax on MCO providers and other insurers in the state of New York, that has been passed on to employers who are sponsoring fully insured plans in New York. And this is going to put some limitations on what states can do with regard to those Medicaid taxes. Now, it's unclear to what extent still that's going to be impacting employers with fully insured plans that are outside of the Medicaid world. But a part of that is going to be dependent on a CMS proposed regulation that came out earlier, and that's going to be providing new standards for what these state taxes can and can't do. So more to come on that, but we're watching that very closely, and also to really kind of get a better understanding of how that's going to be passed on into the employer or group market, and what those costs are going to ultimately be. But that's a big impact, right? Is just how these things are going to impact state healthcare laws, and we should learn more about that hopefully soon. And obviously, we will update all of our clients on that when that happens. So I do want to talk about some of these impacts. When I was looking, I just kind of try to refresh my recollection last night on just some of the CBO's estimates, and the Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF. They came out with some statistics and stats they think are going to be of what the impact's going to be here. And really, the largest financial impact is going to be on the individual insurance market, with double digit premium cost increases that are the median expected increase on the individual market and exchanges next year, for 2026, is expected to be 18%. So that's a big number, right? I mean, that's almost a 20%, average increase for premium costs on the exchanges. And with over $1 trillion Medicaid cuts and ACA exchange reforms, it kind of makes sense. I had some other CBO stats that I kind of pulled before the webinar, but these are huge numbers, right? Nearly 12 million people are expected to be uninsured within the next decade. Um, a lot of these, um, you know, over that next decade, the state level breakdowns are also quite staggering, with the largest losses expected to be in California, Florida, Texas, New York, and Illinois. I mean, and millions of individuals losing coverage or affected by it. So this is going to have a massive impact. Now, one thing that we still don't know is, well, what is the impact going to be on the group markets, for employer sponsored coverage? It's still, I think, unclear, how this will kind of filter out into the system. And the other thing that kind of adds a wrinkle to all of this, is that it is expected that Congress will be issuing there actually was already a bill introduced to kind of bring back those premium tax credit rules that we had, the favorable premium tax credit rules that Ben mentioned earlier, to help individuals get those premium tax credits. That could help lower the costs and change some of these numbers that we're seeing. But if that doesn't happen, there's no doubt that there will be large increases in both the individual and group markets. So that is something we're expected to see here coming in 2026. So Ben, you want to talk a little bit about how this may impact the employer mandate penalty exposure?
Yeah, so most immediately with respect to these changes, the employer mandate and the assessment of the mandate is directly linked to whether you have failed to do what you're supposed to do under the law, which is offer affordable minimum value coverage to full-time employees. But then B, importantly, someone who has not been offered such coverage, who otherwise qualified, goes to the marketplace and receives a premium tax credit. So inherently in that calculation, when you have less people who are eligible to go to the marketplace, that should translate to fewer opportunities to trigger a potential penalty under the employer mandate. That's sort of the narrow impact. More broadly, I mean, Dan and I wanted to sort of briefly mention two things. Number one is, I mean, everybody's kind of heard about the DOGE efforts and the reduction in the size of the federal government and the buyout programs, et cetera, which I think many government employees who took sort of the so-called fork in the road approach are scheduled to exit this month. So fewer humans working at the IRS seems to have led to fewer enforcement efforts, at least anecdotally, based on what Dan and I are seeing and what we're seeing amongst our client population. Second important piece on that is that probably heard earlier this year, there was an interesting case challenging the IRS's process for assessing penalties under the employer mandate. Long story short, the law says first, an employer is supposed to receive a notice from HHS and or the marketplace, and only then can the IRS assess a penalty. But that HHS step has by and large been skipped along the way because the IRS interpreted itself as having the authority to just go straight to the penalty piece. And a court said, no, you got to follow the process. And if you don't do so, that penalty is invalid. So one specific employer successfully challenged the IRS's assessment on a process argument. The district court agreed. Seems unlikely that the Trump administration would appeal that ruling, which probably is the organization that most likely has standing to do so. So, I mean, I think what we're waiting to see is how the IRS responds more broadly, right? Are they just cutting out all penalties right now because of that court ruling and their determination they need to fix the process before they can initiate penalty assessments? What does this mean for other employers who have had penalties assessed within the open tax years? Can they file a refund request with the IRS? Will the IRS approve those? If the IRS doesn't approve those, can they challenge those in court? I mean, fortunately, many employers who have been assessed a penalty have been able to unwind that, but some have not. And these can be eye-popping numbers. So certainly an avenue where employers might feel inclined to pursue that challenge.
Definitely. You want to, if you can just, you want to take this next one as well, kind of talk about some of the key takeaways.
Yeah, right. So again, like I think for both of these, Medicaid related changes and marketplace related changes, there aren't necessarily direct impacts on your employer sponsored plan because your plan operates outside of the marketplace and outside of Medicaid. But there could be flow through implications because if fewer other avenues are available, that might impact employees' decisions to kind of lean into your plan where coverage otherwise would be more expensive, but now it's less expensive because of the restricted scope of the exchange in Medicaid. And certainly to the extent that employers are offering ICHRAs, which were on the verge of being sort of expanded and enhanced under the House version of what would have been the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but that didn't make it into the final version. Your ICHRA interacts with marketplace coverage. So if the marketplace is changing, that could potentially impact your organization and the scope of the ICHRA and how that you're budgeting for that from a cost standpoint.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably more important now than ever, in light of these things that are coming, in 2026 to talk to, people like us, brokers, consultants, attorneys, right? How is this going to really, to get a better understanding of how this is really going to kind of play out and what the cost impacts are going to be, and what, if any plan design changes are needed, to better insulate, your organization from those, increased costs, if it's, now's the time essentially to talk, it's sort of like I hate to have to make it sound like a commercial, but it does kind of, there's just no way around it. Like it's a time to talk to your broker, right? If there ever was a good time, this is it. So, all right. So let's talk about this last one. This is probably the hardest, big bill, picture of all of them. So I will give a clue on this one. This is a famous Chicago blues musician, in honor of Ben joining us today from the great Windy City. I had to throw in a great Chicago blues musician into the mix here, so I'll give a little clue there. So let's talk a little bit about the TICJA, right? So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was the major tax reform law that came out during the first term of the President during President Trump's first term in office, and really the the big thing, I guess, the big reason for why the OBBBA really kind of had to pass, right? Why there was so much pressure on Congress to get this thing done, right? Is that it really makes permanent or extends several of the TICJA's, lower tax rates for individuals and deductions for individuals and businesses, right? Those things kind of had to get done because otherwise, right, the alternative would likely have been, a big crash in the economy and whether it would have been a recession or a stock market crash is kind of unclear, but it would not have been good for the economy if it didn't happen, right? So it kind of had to happen to some extent, right? So when so this was kind of a way to kind of preserve, right, and extend a lot of these lower taxes and deductions and breaks, and that's kind of really we're not really going to get into a lot of the weeds on that. Obviously, we're advisors to companies, not individuals, but right there were a lot of things that changed. The SALT deduction, it increased the alternative minimum tax. A lot of different changes happened here that were really, I think, positive for individuals and businesses. But I think one of the big victories for our industry, at least for the health insurance world, right, is that it maintained the current tax exclusion for employer-sponsored health insurance, which was up on the chopping block, right? It was being heavily debated, not just now for when the OBBA was coming into play in Congress, but also at the time of the TIC show. The ESI tax exclusion was on the chopping block, and it had to be hot. It was heavily debated. So that was, I think, kind of one of the big victories here that happened in these rules. And I think it really kind of, you know, that was really kind of one of the big wins, I think, for the industry, even more so than a lot of these other things that we've been talking about before, like telemedicine and direct primary care, was the sort of the preservation of that big tax exclusion. So, Ben, you want to kind of
Yeah.
take this?
Yeah.
Great.
Do you want to, by the way, before I start, do you want to talk about, give any hints on this bill?
Oh yeah, so this is actually one of my favorite actors. This is probably also one of the hardest pictures pictures I hear because this is not a very well known bill, but he is in my mind a larger than life big bill because he's just one of my favorite actors, and he kind of really seems to really morph his personality. He takes on these roles where it's like you really believe you know, you really believe that he's the guy, playing the role. And so but he is definitely not this is definitely going to be one of the harder ones for the folks out there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, embarrassingly, not only did I not know all the bills, I probably only knew about the bills. I couldn't even figure out the theming until Dan explained it to me. So if there was any question about the quality of my analytical skills, let it be known that they are poor.
No, it's all good. I don't think anyone in our marketing team or even my consulting team knew what this was either,
That's
so
right.
it's all good.
We're going to do kind of a lightning round to round out the other tax related changes that were included in the OBBA. And look, the story of a lot of these are, as Dan noted, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a law passed in 2016, and congressional nuance here was scheduled to expire within 1 decade, so 10 years, absent additional congressional action. So the story of this slide is the provisions that would have potentially expired but for congressional action. And so most of these are things that Congress re-upped and or enhanced, right? So employer tax credit for paid family and medical leave. This was a tax credit that was available under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was scheduled to expire, but Congress re-upped it, permanently extended it, and even actually enhanced it, both in terms of the amount of the tax credit, as well as allowing employers to potentially take the tax credit if they are purchasing an insurance policy to cover their paid leave, either weather mandated or otherwise. So important one there. Similarly, the law extended the tax credit for adoption programs, both in terms of the amount and increasing the income phase out level for that provision. Next two are kind of interesting. Qualified education benefit. You'll recall that during COVID, Congress changed the law to allow employers to take extend the tax preferred coverage under their qualified educational assistance program, not just to continuing education requirements or advanced educational requirements, but also to previously incurred student loans that had been incurred prior to when that individual started working at the employer. This was one of those provisions that's like a will they, won't they kind of thing, because it was originally scheduled to expire. Then Congress re-upped it originally scheduled to expire again. And then, fortunately, under this law, Congress permanently extended that student loan tax preferred status up to 5250 for student loan provisions. And they also
Index it,
index
yeah.
that threshold to inflation. So good change there. And I think a lot of employers were frankly pretty interested in this because you contrast this with like the Trump account where you're kind of like, oh, interesting, but who in our employee population wants this? You got a lot of new students coming out of college with a bunch of student debt who might be interested in student loan repayment. So now that this has been made permanent, we suspect that employers are going to take a lot more interest in the tax preferred avenue available under this provision. 529 plans, as we know, are employee tax savings vehicles for student education. This bill did some interesting things there, which most notably allowed use of 529 accounts for K to 12 educational expenses as well as potential homeschooling educational expenses. And then the final one, qualified transit benefits and moving expenses, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, sort of as a revenue raiser, scaled back the tax preferred nature of these benefits. And again, those tax preferred benefits were scheduled to go back into effect absent congressional action, but Congress took action to permanently eliminate those benefits. Now, to be clear, they got rid of the bicycle assistance benefit way back in 2016. That remains gone permanently. They didn't entirely eliminate the tax preferred benefit for transit and parking. They just sort of removed the tax preferred treatment for the employer piece of that. So again, nothing changes here. That kind of stays the way it's been in the last 10 years. But it's not reverting back to the original state in which there was far more tax preferred treatment for purposes of the employer side of that contribution.
That's great. All right, that was great. Thanks. So, you know, I'll kind of start this off with I think some of the big takeaways here, and I'll let you jump in and add your big takeaways. But I think obviously, right, review all the big implications here in our different takeaway slides above, but especially those cost impacts, really to understand kind of how the OBBBA, right, impacts your benefits program and its costs. And review that with your plan's trusted advisors, people like us, your attorneys, consultants, your service providers, to really make sure that you're implementing these changes correctly and in compliance with the applicable laws. And of course, clear communication is always important, especially from when you're hearing it from ERISA attorneys. They should, people like us, will always say put it in writing, right? Make sure you have a written, not just the actual communications to the employees, but you may also want to have right, the fiduciary side of it, the internal memorandum and documentation of what changed and why, as well in your files, just to really kind of fully, make sure you're doing this correctly and you're explaining why you made the changes you made. And of course, just stay tuned. We're still expecting a lot of new rules, regulations, guidance from the agencies that we talked about today. They're going to help us really kind of understand like things like how do you do that non-discrimination testing for the Trump accounts, or how do you do some of these things that we still don't really have the details on. So we'll obviously be updating you on those things through alerts in our Compliance Resource Center blog page, throughout the year. But if you have any questions, we are more than happy to take those. I think we still have about 5 minutes, but is there anything, any other key takeaways, Ben, that you kind of wanted to add to that, or anything you wanted to say? And then maybe I think we'll go from there and try to see if there's any questions out there we can
Yeah,
talk
I
about.
mean, it's all digestible, right? As Dan
Yeah,
and I noted at the outset, this is not the Affordable Care Act. This is not the Consolidated Appropriations Act. All of the things here are, something you can boil down to a 1 hour webinar pretty easily and digest pretty easily. And frankly, none of these, unless I'm missing something, are like mandates, right? It's not like we've got a checklist of things you have to do, otherwise you're going to be out of compliance. These all just sort of create options and avenues, tax preferred options and avenues. But as there's a lot happening over on the HSA side, and I think that as employers continue to sort of shift towards a more prevalent high deductible health plan HSA environment, even a predominant high deductible health plan environment, those are going to be important options to allow employers to facilitate and ease the sort of transition into that type of health plan for employees who aren't yet familiar with that.
No, I think that's a great point. I think that's really important. Like exactly like we talked about before this, right? I mean, I think this is not a game changer law like the ACA, but it is going to have give I think employers a lot of more flexibility with their plan design choices. Although it will likely increase costs. I think there's probably no way around that for next year. I think we are going to see an increase in cost, but this definitely does give you a lot more flexibility, and I think those are definitely some great takeaways. So thank you for that. I don't see actually any. The only question I do see here, I'm just taking a quick look through, is how does a parent receive the Trump account with a child born in 2025? And I imagine she's probably talking about the $1,000. But I believe that individual would still get that amount.
Yeah,
Child
well, and
was
I
born
mean,
in
again, this is one
2025.
where we're going to see how that's implemented. But my understanding is that those are going to be automatically created by the government for individuals who are born in the United States who otherwise have qualifying, meet the qualifying criteria, and who have a Social Security number. So the government issues Social Security numbers, and presumably in conjunction with them issuing a Social Security number, um, the Trump account will be established and funded. And or you would have the ability, presumably, to establish your own and indicate to the IRS and have it funded there. Um, my guess is that this is going to be something that's facilitated in conjunction with your tax filing in the year in which your child is born. But stay tuned there. But it remains to be seen that what that's going to look like. But the law is such that everyone's supposed to get that sort of automatically.
Right, that was my understanding as well. Next question is, how does the HSA change affect if you have an ICRA? Um, I'm not sure if I really understand
I
exactly.
don't think it should. I mean, the way that the ICRAs work are such that it presumes that the employer has not offered that individual a qualifying high deductible health plan. Now, the individual may have enrolled in a qualifying health plan, high deductible health plan under the marketplace and may have implemented their own HSA under the marketplace. But as an employer, you generally wouldn't,
Right,
then in that circumstance, implement, facilitate, fund, et cetera, an HSA for that individual because it's not your qualifying high deductible health plan. They may, be funding their own. Um, but, but, uh, but yeah, it shouldn't impact anything from an employer administration standpoint.
exactly. Yeah, that's how I would interpret that as well. So I think we're pretty much out of time here. The last
Yeah.
question was, were there any changes to self-funded high deductible health plans? We did talk about the HSA changes. That will impact high deductible health plans, but there was nothing that was specific to self-funded or self-insured plans. Um, nothing specific to self-insured high deductible health plans, in the OBBA. But I would go back to those slides at the very beginning of the presentation that talk about the changes to HSAs and high deductible health plans. I think we're out of time here. So I just want to thank you all for I want to thank my co-presenter, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This is really nice.
Thank you, Dan and Ben. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope you found the session valuable. Once again, the recording and slides will be sent via email for those who are eligible for credits. Those will also be included in that email. I pasted a link for a survey. If you could leave some feedback in the chat to improve for the future. Also, if you have any questions, their email address is csg.event@corpsin.com. So hope you have a great
Great.
rest of your day. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you.